my theme is putting best value into the supply chain context and look from relations or transactions or performances from both sides. Here I go with my hands. It's a supplier or a vendor and an owner working together in the supply chain context. But first, let's go in a little bit of the development in the Netherlands. And here, Dean was already talking about it and said, well, your first visit was around 2002. And then in 2006, we met at Heijmans, one of the big constructing firms. And Dean gave his presentation on best value and how it could work in the Netherlands. And I did something on best value. And we used complete different terminologies and still ended up in the same philosophy. And that's how can we cooperate in a supply chain in order to improve quality, to reduce risks, and to reduce costs, and in that order. Well, and here you see a famous picture Jeroen is always using to show how it takes off in the Netherlands, and that's best value specifically. And we were lucky to have Rijkswaterstaat, one of the ministries in the Netherlands for infrastructure, and they had large infrastructural works that had to be completed in 4 years. So they couldn't go into the classic way of tendering, and we're looking for a new way to do it. And that was the takeoff in the Netherlands. It was a 1 billion project, or approximately 1 billion, and there we were. And it's called SPEED project. SPEED for we had to realize this new infrastructure works in a fast meaning. Now we think, and that's one about metrics, because it's spreading out over the country, so we don't have an overview. But we think there's more than 350 best value procurement methods applied, or tenders using best value procurement. There's more than 25 A+ certified people, and 200 or over, Jeroen, B even more. We're approaching the 300 B certified people. But using best value procurement from the owner side means that we have, or we need visionaries from the sales side to to make ends meet, of course. So you can read it here. Each tender will invite many vendors to join this tender and try to win it. And only one is going steps further and go into the realization phase. So we have been educating many sales and sales-oriented organizations. And from the Dutch people here, there are many vendors learning about best value. And what we see in the first years, it was very difficult for vendors to learn how it works, to mirror all the questions from the best value procurement angle in how do I react. And I will talk about that later a bit more. So what we learned there is that using best value procurement needs vendors that know how the methodology works, but also how they should organize themselves in order to be able to show their expertise, have their metrics right, and things like that. I will be talking about it later. And now we know that only when the vendors really understand best value and really have their expertise in order and their metrics and their simplicity, they can meet the best value relationships and best value realization of projects. So that's what we learned, and we put much emphasis in the Netherlands on educating vendors from ICT, from services, facilities, also infrastructure, building, constructing. It's all over different industries. And it looks too simple probably, but please remember that there's always many people entering a tender procedure. So the world of best value sales should be much larger than the world of best value procurement. It's an end-to-one. So Now I want to step to the supply chain perspective on best value, and here there's one warning. I sent these slides over to Dean, and the only reaction, and you heard him talking earlier, the only reaction is, Sikko, is this simple enough? Please make it simple. So there I go, I try to make it simple. And if not, please raise your hand or use another method to warn me and say, well, I have a question here. This is a simple, for supply chain people, this is a simple supply chain. It's 4 parties, and the owner is here, and this is the tier 1 or the first supplier, and so on and so on. And over time, they will supply goods and services from that direction to the owner. And if you look at it, you see that there's at least 3 purchasing activities. So imagine here's a car. At the end, you need to purchase tires. You need to purchase the raw materials and machines and so on. So in supply chain, every end product or service needs, in this case, 3 purchases. Is that logic? Is it adding value? Where's the logic of a supply chain producing cars? Is it up there in the raw materials, or is it there in the car being manufactured? You have to think, so that's not okay, right? The logic, what we call in supply chain, the classic logic of supply chains is a pushed supply chain. So the logic starts there from raw materials. I produce steel, make doors, put them in cars, sell cars. In the information age where we live now, the real information on steering supply chains is here. The number of cars that's being used in practice, or the volume of buildings that have to be built or cleaned, or the number of ICT that has to be serviced, is always at the end of the supply chain. So that's a big difference from the classic supply chain to the current ones, right? And now you can see that the logic, the information, comes from the end of the supply chain, and there's no need for decision making in here. How many tires are there on one car?
5.
Right, that's one that is thinking. How many do you use?
4.
I will give the answer. It's information. So if I sell one car, how many tires do I need to be produced? Come on, guys, it's Monday morning. Okay, so that's one. 3 purchasing activities. And that means that we have 3 sales activities as well. Same story applies. Is there any logic of selling a tire 4 times or 3 times before it's put on the car? No. But we're still doing it. Huh? And I come to the point in the why we do it. Now, that's probably not all, that's the logic of sales and purchasing, and we're talking about best value procurement and best value sales and so on. But now let's have a look in all the indirect functions that apply to the supply chain as well. And that's stocks. Why do we need stocks in supply chains? You can't predict. So I have a stock in here because I can't predict the volume that he is going to use. Right? That's called an outgoing stock. Why is he having an incoming stock? The same story, huh? He can't rely on the supplier of supplying him. So we will be talking about trust and the role of trust in best value, but there's a distrust thing in supply chain, a disconnect between the supplier and the customer. So therefore I have stocks. Is there any need in, again, the car manufacturing, to have a stock of tires in here? Because we already know, right? So we change, in the modern way of looking at supply chain, we change stocks for information, right? And in the best value thinking, who is responsible, who is accountable for having enough tires in this organization? Could be a question for the exam. Right, Dean? Who do you want to be accountable in best value philosophy? The customer, the owner, or the supplier? Supplier. So we can, applying best value thinking in the supply chain, we can stop having incoming stocks in here. And then, but that's thinking, what I'm going to do now. If there's no need for an incoming stock here, is there a need for an incoming stock there? No. And not there. That means that there is no need for an outgoing stock there. Do you follow me? Because I can connect the information from the end market, in an ideal situation of course, to the supplier and so on. It sounds like just in time. But it's just in time from this production process to that production process and not from stock to stock. Because the information on production is in here and in there, right? Very good question. It sounds like just in time. But just in time in the classic way of supply chain is a pushed thing, right? Vendor managed inventory or vendor managed production inventory and things like that fits in there. Another one, a favorite of mine, is administration. How many times are the tires administered in a classic supply chain? In this one? 3 times, or 4 times, and probably 6 times, because we don't trust each other, so there is an administration here and there, for instance, right? Is it adding value? So here comes the question. Why does this owner not pay the supplier when he is ordering whatever he wants to have? Because he's heavily dependent on that supplier. So why is not, he said, well, I want 4 tires, here's the money. Why doesn't he do that? They're thinking, Dean. You have to trust him. But then think it the other way around. If we don't pay him on order, then he has to supply and wait for his money. And trust, we will go in this conference, we will have many discussions on trust. But if I don't expect him to deliver, so therefore I don't pay him before he does, I expect my supplier to deliver me, and all the financial terms are in there, in the delivery. So there's not an equal relationship in there, right? So again, in best value philosophy, why wouldn't I pay my supplier whenever I need something? Or even pay him in advance? Right? What's the information on an invoice? From him to him. What's on there? Tax, addresses, the volume delivered, or the services delivered. I mentioned the address and things like that. On what kind of document we already see the same information? On the order. So now if we simplify this one, the order and the invoice is just an over-typing or reusing the information that's already in the order, right? Is that 100% perfect? So what do we do if we retype the order and call it an invoice? In terms of best value. Introduce risk. And if risk goes up, quality goes down, cost go down, start talking to each other, and so on, right? So thinking about best value and applying it to supply chains, one of the critical questions for me is, do we dare to pay a supplier who is in a best value relationship with me before he has delivered the services? And if the answer is yes, we really could go into a best value relationship. And I use the metaphor of employees in this organization. Because employees are paid the salary each, 21st or 24th of the month, right? And is there any check on the performances we made before the salaries are paid? No. So we can do it, but only in our own organization and not in the best value supplying situation, right? So, well, there's many more. I will go into there, but it's the same. So my conclusion here is that all this administrative, all these indirect functions, all these activities we take or we have in between owners and vendors is causing complexity and well, making the relationship less transparent. So we don't want that in a best value philosophy. So I stole some pictures from Dean just to illustrate and get you into the slides for the rest of this conference. But in a classic economic way, academic economic philosophy, it's called transaction cost economics. It is my company against the others. It's my profit for my shareholders in my silo against others. So if I pay suppliers less and make more money from customers, I have more profit and I'm rewarded for it, right? We have a silo-based thinking, and we don't want that. We want less of that. We don't want in supply chain, in best value thinking in supply chains, we don't want silo thinking. We want flow. We want suppliers, best value suppliers, delivering their quality into my own processes. If we take this silo-based thinking, the former one was a one organization-based silo thing. If we put that in supply chain perspective, you have all the silos in an organization, between an organization, and so on. Is there any chance of getting any information from a certain point in a supply chain through the supply chain? What do you think? Oh, no, don't think. What do you know? So here's the second statement for best value in supply chain. As long as we think in silos and we think we can outclass, we can be better than somebody else, or we, well, use somebody else for our own profit, best value will not take off in supply chain. Right? So we want to stop with all these transactions, all these contracts, and try to build another way of looking at supply chains. And here's the slides where Dean really said, simplify, simplify, simplify. So here I go and try to do it, right? This is an owner. In the classic way of doing it, the classic silo behavior, the owner says, here's my RFI, RFP, RFQ, the way of tendering. He is going into the market. What's the freedom of suppliers? Once an owner entered the supplying market with the tender procedure, in the classic terms. Sorry? To propose. That's the freedom, to propose, to write a proposal. And in the proposal, what's the freedom of the supplier? What happens if he tells the owner that he knows something that's better than what he asks? Send away, turn down, right? Because he's acting outside the procedure. And then the owner will also say, well, I'm sorry to do that, but the law enforces me to do so, right? So the law enforces me not to think or to use information, because I have to apply by the rules. And we know that it's, most of the time, it's his translation of the rules, right? So it's not the sense of the rules that he used, but he internal, in his silo, somebody has translated it, and then he's applying. So he demands, he controls, he takes the decisions, and uses contract. What happens if we manage a relationship with the supplier and there is a contract in between? Wow. What will you do? What do you? Who has a contract in his family relation with your spouse or with your relation? Yeah, niceness. You look at the contract every night and see whether, in your case, your partner has done what you contracted. Who is doing that? How long will the relation last if you do that? A day. Okay, that's the American way. In the Netherlands, it takes 3 or 4 days. So now I got the frequency with you. Yeah. And we have a function in the Netherlands, and that's called the contract manager. So even have somebody who is managing the contract, looking at suppliers through the contract and say, well, and so on. Right? So we don't want it. It gets vendors that start delivering what you asked. Right? And now, Dean, here's your other picture. We will see a lot of that. Sorry, I stole your picture. But what happens if the owner always talks to the supplier? He will go away. He will not do any innovations, will not make himself better. He will not learn. He will just supply, right? We learned this in the car manufacturing industry. And the big difference between Japanese and European brands and the American brands the last 8-10 years. And now it's okay again because the American manufacturing companies applied new methodologies, but still, it was a nice difference between two supply chains. So, what do we want? We now teaching owners and clients to say, where's my competence as an owner? Is it in managing suppliers? And is it in applying laws and rules to deal with suppliers? Or is my competence in selling something to my market? Right? So we really want to do a 180 with owners and say, well, I'm not managing the suppliers, I'm managing my own market and try to apply best value to my owners or to my end markets, right? And now you see that if I do that, I need suppliers that are with me, that can talk of their success and their best value and their results in contributions to what I'm doing in the market. It's them keeping stocks because I sell to market. It's them doing the administration of what they sold to me because I'm selling to market. It's their information they give to me, management information they give to my organization in order to steer or manage whatever I do. So we don't talk in contracts or transactions anymore. We talk in contribution. What is this specific supplier contributing in my end market? Right? So a complete reverse through the best value thinking of a 180 degrees turning around the owner. Is this simple enough? You're all with me? So if that's best value in supply thinking, it means that the questions I ask to my supplying market is not give me this, that, and that 1,700 requirements. It is a simple question, how are you going to contribute to my supply, my value I deliver to the end market? Right? So using the same picture, it is a owner who at one time says to the suppliers, who is with me? Who want to help me in the market? And then he turns around and does the same to his end market, right? It needs a supplier, let's go to the supplier position, who says, this is what I can do for you. And I've done it 3 times with different owners. I've done it in different situations. And this is the success and the results I got. So that's the performance information he is using to show that he's able to give that contribution to the specific owner. Right? It's that simple. This is my contribution. I've done it 4 times in comparable situation. This is what you get. This is my contribution. And then he's silent, because after he is selected, he is going to perform. Of whose interest is it that this supplier is going to perform after he made the deal with the owner? Is it the supplier, the vendor, or the client owner? Wow, thinking again. This one is simple. And both is a typical Dutch answer, because we always say both, because that keeps all options open. Huh? But in this case, I want a either vendor or client answer. Sorry? Neither. That's the other typical Dutch answer. Okay, the client. Okay, my statement would be the vendor. Because what happens if the vendor performs? No, he was already paid. We made that deal earlier. No, he gets paid. He gets another contract, but that's the commercial with other vendors in the next one. But if I perform as a supplier, the chances of the owner to perform increases or decreases? Increases, because he has no risk for that specific vendor, because he is performing, right? And we did lots of research in misperformance of vendors, and we know that between 60 and 80% of the mistakes they make is caused by the owner sending wrong information to the suppliers. So if we take that one out, the simple answer is the vendor. It's in the vendor interest of performing, because therefore his performance goes up and the performance of the client goes up. Well, he talks to the market, selling more. In whose interest is it that the owner sells more? Obviously the owner, but also the vendor, because then his volume goes up as well. So a good best value vendor sees the owner as an opportunity to enter in the end market, right? And therefore he needs his performance to go up. Because if his performance goes up, the performance of the owner goes up, and therefore the volume in the end market has a positive tendency. Right? Okay. Sometimes they have to talk to each other. How are we doing? Did you have a good sleep last night? And so on. And then after they've done it, they go back to work again. Right. Is this simple enough? Yes, Sikko. Then we looked into the why is it that if the performance of the performance of the vendor goes up, why does risk go down, quality goes up, and price goes down? And we, at first, we really were astonished by that it worked that way. And then we came up with the simple learning curve theory. Who is aware of learning curves? A learning curve simple says, if I do something for the first time, I have a lot of risk because I don't know what I'm doing. Costs go up because I have to do it for the first time, and quality is low. Right? So learning curve says, if I do it the second time, third time, fourth time, fifth time, I will be better in it. That's the reason why we go here 5, 6, 7 times, Dean. That's the real learning curve. No jokes today? All right. Thanks for the feedback. So if I find a supplier who can show me that he is able to do things, and he has done it 3, 4, 5 times before, so he has performance information, where on the learning curve will he be? Up there or here? Somewhere here. Do I like a supplier who is here on the learning curve or there? Do I like this one better? Right? Simple as that. So now we translated best value thinking from a owner-client perspective into looking for learning curves, experiences. So that adds on the typical question in best value, how do you know that you can do what you offer me? Show me. Where's your performance information? Right? And now in looking into performance information, we want to learn where they are on the supply, on the learning curve. In whose interest is it that the supplier keeps on going on the learning curve? The vendor or the supplier? In this case, it's the vendor. Because if I can help my supplier to move from there to there, what happens? Risk goes down, quality goes up, cost go down. So I have to make my suppliers better. And how do I enable my suppliers to get better? Give them more projects or more volume, or help them to improve. Or if I do it on a one-to-one, it's a simple plan, do, check, action, improvement cycles that I do many times. We do that in our own organization, and in this case, this shows that I have to do that with suppliers to make them better. Interesting, huh? Never thought of me as a vendor having an interest, a big interest in improving my suppliers. Right? And obviously, tender procedures and law, we have difficulties in there to apply it. Because if I say, well, I'm going to give you an extra volume, because therefore I learned that your learning curve will be better, cost go down, risk goes down, and quality goes up. Sorry for the hands, I do that again. Price goes down, risk goes down, quality goes up. You might run into tender problems, of course, because, well, at a certain point of time, the volume is so big that law enforces you to go into the tender market again. But this is for us, for me, a very important and even simple picture on how best value works in supply chain relationships. Well, and also this is one that will be presented a lot of times the coming 4 days. But it really is from a me and them, from a supplier position, not thinking that the customer, the owner, is them, or from a owner perspective, think that the vendor is them, but really think of an integrated project. You would call it vertical integration in management philosophy, but really integrate. And therefore, back to the silos, it needs a leader who can actually think above these silos, 10,000 feet, and say, hey, it is of my interest, my company, that my supplier improves his quality or enter the learning curve. So I not only have to manage my own organization, but my leadership involves my suppliers. Right? In my own interest. Try to tell that to your stakeholders, because they might be only interested in money and think money, 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 the Wolf of Wall Street. And say, I'm not interested in improvement of suppliers, they've got to take care of themselves. And in that case, you know you're wrong. Right? What do you do if that happens? If your management and your directors or your shareholders say, well, stop doing this thing. It's going to be one of the questions, but take it as it is and try to find a little spot somewhere where you can show your leadership and say, well, I shield this relationship from all the stakeholder or shareholder thinking, and I'm going to try it. Well, you can all read what's in here. Probably transparency, I didn't go into that one. But doing this with your supplier and the owner actually means that you have to open up your organization to your supplier, right? And the other way around. And I will give an example in a minute. But it means, in the change where we actually do this, it takes a supplier who says, this is what I've done for you. Here is all the information. Look into my own systems, because whatever I supply you and you put in your system is supplied by me anyway. So it's my information you can use. It's all transparent across the sector. Well, I promised an example. Here's a shipbuilder. And I will give an example of the classic supply chain and the new one that we built with best value philosophies and how it can change. Here you see the classic supply chain in the upper side, this one. And how ships are sold is that this owner, the builder of the ship, has its own sales engineering, his marketing and sales organization, who is completely separated from the rest of the organization, and they are offering. How do you offer a ship? Anybody an idea? You take the last one and add 10% and say, well, this is my offer. Simple. Because are salespeople trained to design a ship? So that's the only evidence they have. Huh? It's like the war. We fight the last war. So they do the sales. And then they got the project contracted. Oh, gee, problems. Because now we have the order. And then they start to detailed engineering in their own organization, go to procurement, say, here's my detailed engineering, please find me some suppliers. Right? And then they go into the market, have an RFP, an RFI, and whatever. And then the suppliers are going into engineering. Which department of the supplier is going into engineering? Their sales department. What does their sales department do in offering? Takes the last ship and add 10%. Right? And then the suppliers of the suppliers, you can continue this. Huh? They come up with a price. Is that the right price? Do they know what they're offering? So by definition, it's not the right price. Is there risk in there? Yes, risk goes up. Quality? Down, and so on. And then procurement selects the best price in a very classic way. Huh? So then we are stuck with a supplier who took the last ship, added 10% for our order, who was based on our last ship, adding 10%. Then there's a contract. I made some remarks on contracts, and then the detailed engineering starts. What is, if you get the order in this specific technological world, and the sales department has this last ship plus 10%, and then got the order, what does the engineering department do? So we're moving from the sales silo to the engineering silo. What do they do? Anybody of you in engineering? No. Sorry for the examples then. They throw away everything they've got. And they're probably right to do so because it's double last ship plus 10%. So they start engineering from scratch and do it all anew. That's what meant here. And then the realization starts. It takes 4 years, this full process, to come up with this ship from a start, basic sales by the shipbuilder, and then organizing it. Right? And the cost of failure are somewhere between 15 and 25%. And the example that's in here, this vendor, specific installation contractor, said, and he had his metrics right, I have got 10 orders of this specific yard, and I always had a cost level of 120% of my sales price. So he actually could show that this way of working in his specific environment was losing him money. So what we did, using best value, is say, well, we integrated sales and procurement, or integrated, we brought these two silos together and said, how would you tender a engineering job or an installation job for a ship that is not being sold? So really proactive. There was no market, no ship sold, but I still want to select an installation contractor. And then immediately the contractor said, well, in that case, I would like to cooperate with you, but then I'm going to bring in my detailed engineering of this ship in your sales process. Right? So we now brought in knowledge and actual experience from the suppliers organization, which is not in this contacting, sales, purchasing, procurement organization, but in the real engineering. We brought them into the acquisition processes of the owner. That was reducing a lot of cost, a lot of quality, and a lot of risk, because the experience was there. And they said, this is how we did it in the last 10 ships. This is how we build it. This was the effect of our way of working. This was the cost of the ship that we made. And they could show performance metrics, and they could show why they did certain things and how they applied their technology, or how they applied their knowledge, and what the owner got from it. So now, by doing this simple thing, is using best value in an anticipation situation, so proactive. Not in a market, but in a proactive situation. And therefore, we knew what we could offer to a client, right? And now the total cycle here is brought back into 2 years. The total cost of this ship is about 75–80% of what it used to be. So imagine the 125 I mentioned and this 75. So profit goes up enormously. Sales success goes up enormously because there was a price thing going in here. They had to negotiate and contract with these operators of these dredging ships. And now they simply could say, if you take this ship, I can offer it to you by, let's say, 80 or 85%. And I know that this ship is going to work because I build it and I build it and I build it and I did it this way and I used this supplier and all the performance metrics were in there. So they actually used the learning curve mechanism to say, hey, I want to reorganize it. So it's 2 years now. So you can sell a ship to an owner, to an operator and say, in 2 years you will have it instead of 4 years. And I know I will be able to build it because I've done it. Right? So the total competences of this supply chain is much higher using best value mechanisms than the classic way of silo-based working. Okay, well, this is a slide we use, and this might be the most complex one, by the way. We use it and say, well, what does it need in the sales environment? And I would like to stress this part. The slides will be on the website, so you can look at it, or we discuss it in one of the train-the-trainer sessions. But it needs a supplier who thinks ahead of the owner. Before the order is out in the market, he has to think what his competencies and his added value, or the things he can contribute to the owner. He has to think before the order is out. What am I good at? And what we see in practice is that he's then reducing the number of tenders he's entering, because he will know beforehand that he's not going to win, because his specific performance metrics will not apply to this specific owner. And even in public tendering in the Netherlands, we now see that certain suppliers say, I'm not going to enter all these procedures with all the hammering of suppliers, introducing risk, reducing quality, because I don't want that supplier as the next performance I'm going to make, because it's going to ruin my performance metrics. I don't want non-performing customers. That's called customer of choice. We actually teach or learn suppliers to choose which customers are fit for their next performance. That's a complete different way of thinking. Right? And then the normal offering and things are in there. So, coming to an end, my suggestion for best value would be that we do two things. We look into persons, and we call that leadership. It's a bit of a consulting buzzword, of course, but look into people that can actually elevate above all these silos and say, hey, I understand that I need a supplier which is a crazy understanding, of course, because we all know that we need suppliers. So we are going to deal with them in a different manner and try to actually look at their competencies. And looking from both sides. So we teach leaders not to work in their own interest, but the examples I gave, improve the quality of suppliers is in my own interest. So there's a mutual interest of improving quality and so on. So here, the invitation to join the discussion on leadership and looking from both sides for supply chain. So thank you very much. And thanks, Deans, for having all of us in here and have this wonderful experience. Thank you.